The radiant gods of Olympus are no protectors of this world. They are a ravenous pack. Monsters who tore away the right to dictate law. Titans, giants, the 100-headed Typhon. This is the chronicle of how the new order thrice choked on its own terror and gore. The Olympian triumph was bought with foul betrayals, with severed tendons ripped from living flesh, with mountains of the slain. Our cosmos is nothing but charred slag, numbed beneath the heavy boots of the conquerors. Act 1. The Black Bile of Othrys. The cosmos groaned. Cronus crushed it in his fist. The sinewy flesh of the world, freshly ripped from chaos, knew no freedom, only the trade of one butcher for another. The youngest of the Titans took his father's throne. His feet sank into the warm broth of Uranos's blood. The sky burned with the screams of his mutilated father. Cronus held the sickle, heavy, jagged, a rusty flint knife with which he had just sliced away the flesh of the Creator. This was his triumph. It became his noose. The king forgot Mother Gaia, forgot his promises. The 100-handed brothers, the Hecatonchires, and the blind one-eyed Cyclopes remained exactly where they were, to rot, deep underground. Tartarus oozed thick pitch, locking them in its belly. Campe guarded the prisoners, a monstrous thing reeking of cold crocodile skin and venom. Cronus gathered his Titan brothers around him. The circle closed. The rule of the sickle began. The new throne stood on fear. But fear is a rotten pillar. Mother Gaia did not forgive her son this new grievance. The dying Uranos wheezed through his teeth one last bitter prophecy. You will be overthrown by a son, your own blood, your own flesh. In Cronus's chest, black bile boiled. Betrayal lurked everywhere. In every rustle of grass he heard the breath of a future rebel. The Titan resolved to break fate, to chew through the thread of Ananke. His method was simple. Rhea gave birth. The child was still crying. The Titan snatched it away, opened his maw, swallowed it alive. 5 children, one by one. They fell into the deep mire of his stomach. Hestia, slow as falling ash. Demeter, carrying within her the spasms of barren, parched soil. Hera, shrouded in the smoke of future sacrifices. Grim Hades, whose body even then grew heavy, filling with the dull ore and gold of the underworld. And Poseidon, the raw, roaring mass of deep black water. They could not die. Divine blood is like hot mercury. It cannot be digested. They lay there, crammed, in the sour blindness of his viscera. They breathed with another's breath. They grew. But Cronus was not just swallowing children. He was swallowing pieces of existence itself, trying to stop the inevitable. Along with them, the dull silence of the earth's depths, the iron fury of storms, and a scorching, hungry fire compressed and calcified inside the Titan. Act 2. Deception in the darkness of Dictae. The 6th child kicked Rhea from within. The woman went numb, no more tears, only a dull fury. She would not let her fruit be devoured again. She fell to her knees before the ancient pair, sky and earth. Together they wove a deception. No grand gestures, a simple trap. At night, Rhea left. The sharp mica of the Cretan shore cut her feet. She hid in the cave of Dicte. It smelled of damp moss and wet goat hair. Zeus was born in the darkness, smeared with Cretan clay. Instead of a son, Rhea brought her husband a bundle. Old dirty cloth. Inside the omphalos. A heavy, jagged piece of rock. Cronus had gone wild. His eyes were blurred with sticky sweat. His head throbbed with fury against inescapable doom. He expected a strike from behind every pillar. Rhea carefully smeared the coarse burlap with hot amniotic fluid and fresh goat's blood. It reeked of raw childbirth. It was enough. The Titan did not unwrap the cloth. He did not look closely. He acted like a cornered, starving predator driven by the fear that his prey would escape or his brothers would demand a share. One swift, primal motion, snatched and swallowed in one gulp, without chewing. His jaw cracked with a dull snap as the sharp edge of the stone scraped the bone. The heavy bundle sank to the very bottom of his guts, dragging his stomach down. The Titan spat out thick, bloody saliva and settled down. He believed he was saved. Meanwhile, a great secret movement unfolded on Crete. The boy had to be hidden from the eye that sees the movement of every blade of grass. Rhea suspended the cradle from the branches of a gnarled ash tree. Zeus dangled between the sky and the earth, neither in the sea nor on dry land, a blind spot for the king's sight. The nymphs Adrasteia and Ida washed him in a trough, fed him wild crystallized honey, gave him the rich milk of the goat Amalthea to drink, and around the tree a guard stood day and night. The curetes, wild rock spirits encrusted with red clay. Whenever the boy started to cry, they would strike up a frenzied dance, clashing swords against heavy bronze shields. Rawhide armor creaked. The roar of metal drowned out the infant's wail. Far away on Mount Othrys, Cronus heard only the dry wind rustling the leaves and the eternal Cretan storms crashing against the cliffs, or so it seemed from afar. Crete had always been seen as a wild nest of elements, an island of subterranean rumbles and squalls. The very earth there breathed with thunder, so the sovereign did not even turn his head. Act 3. The Shattering of the World. Zeus grew up on wild meat and mountain winds. Inside him lived the fury of his entire imprisoned generation. But charging head-on at Cronus was foolishness. The Titans were too massive. They crushed with sheer weight. Something else was needed, not brute force. Calculation. Zeus found Metis, an oceanid who knew how to think further than a fist could reach. Crude, primordial strength had to yield to cunning. Metis brewed a concoction, no sorcery, just the raw bile of the earth, a mixture that numbs the tongue and turns the stomach inside out. The deception took a long time to prepare. Rhea slipped her son into the palace of Othrys disguised as a new servant. For weeks, Zeus silently studied his enemy moving closer to the throne step by step until he became just another nameless, familiar shadow to the Titans. Cronus grew used to his presence. Suspicion blinds a tyrant who expects a blow from the outside but falls quiet when the rebel stands behind his shoulder. Zeus became the king's cupbearer. During a great feast, while the Titans roared with laughter and wiped their greasy beards, Zeus poured Metis's bitter draught into Cronus's golden cup, right into the sweet, swirling nectar. The effect was instantaneous. The Titan drank. His eyes bulged from their sockets, his massive body convulsed. Foam flew. Cronus fell to his knees, wheezing. His throat expanded, tearing muscles with a sickening crunch, shattering royal teeth, and out onto the floor flew the omphalos, a heavy stone wrapped in rotting burlap. And then the bloody eruption began. The Titan's stomach contracted like a frantic womb, forcing everything upward. Cronus vomited up his own life, spitting out his children in reverse order. Poseidon tumbled onto the floor first. After him, tearing through his father's esophagus, came grim Hades, then Hera and Demeter. They were not infants. They emerged adults, heavy, furious. Their bodies were coated in thick gastric slime green bile, and shreds of their father's viscera. 5 mature, powerful gods fought for freedom through one narrow throat. They were suffocating in the guts. They tore at the walls of the esophagus with bare hands clawing into living flesh, shoving themselves upward closer to the air. Last to burst free was Hestia, the firstborn swallowed earliest of all. She had spent the most time in that sour cage. Cronus wasn't just vomiting. His mouth tore open to his ears. Along with the gods, chunks of his own stomach, black foam and spilled entrails burst forth. The Titan lay in a puddle of his own gore, hollowed out, deflated, powerless. Around him stood his Titan brothers. A heavy silence settled over the vast hall of Othrys. No one dared to intervene, for at that exact second, the breath of new sharp forces surged into the old world of mass and chaos. The 6 gods spoke not a single word. They simply vanished into the wild night storm roaring outside the palace windows. Becoming part of the sky, the sea, and the underground depths, the old world was too late. The new power chose its place in the far north, where the white, icy spire of Olympus pierced the very sky. They washed the warm, paternal fluids from their faces as they moved. In their eyes burned a thirst for vengeance seared by years of blindness. The world fractured. The old order choked on its own vomit. There was nothing to negotiate. A slaughter was brewing. The young gods claimed their right to the world. Cronus had to surrender the throne and leave. But the Titans, Coeus, Crius, Hyperion, Iapetus, only bared their teeth. To them, the new generation was just brittle bone easily snapped with one heavy blow. Ancient Othrys recognized only the law of the crushing weight and raw power. Punishment awaited the rebels. So Zeus went through shrines and dens. He began to fracture the Titan monolith, buying off those who wavered. Ancient Oceanus was the first to catch the stench of massive bloodshed. He weighed the thickness of the Titan's skulls. Quietal, he crawled back into his deep, cold mires, declared neutrality, lay low at the bottom, waiting to see whose corpse would float past first. But his daughter, the Black River Styx, did not hesitate. She came to Olympus first, her bare feet stepping on sharp stones. Behind her she led her brood, wild predatory children. Nike, Kratos, Zealous, and Bia. Victory, zeal, strength, and might. 4 hungry beasts without fear or pity. They fell to their knees, licking Zeus's hands like hounds. They became his personal guard, his retainers for the dirtiest executions. Wherever Zeus pointed his finger, they tore throats. Then betrayal came from Othrys itself. Themis, whose eyes saw the future through blood and ash, walked away from Cronus, along with her son Prometheus. Prometheus knew the end. His gaze pierced time like sharp mica, and he saw Othrys as a pile of dead ash long before the first stone fell. The old Titans believed only in the thickness of their own bones and the power of the fist. To his mind, they were already doomed. Prometheus chose the side that would claim the future, bringing his gift to Olympus. Cold, sober calculation now served the new king. And from the darkest fissures of the earth, where warm flesh rots, crawled Hecate. She reeked of a fresh grave wormwood and wolf fur. She swore her oath to Zeus under the night sky, gripping jagged daggers in her hands. For her allegiance, she exacted a terrible price from the young god. A piece of the clean sky, a piece of the solid earth, and dominion over the salty, dark waters of the subterranean seas. This was no border dispute over a field. 2 worlds collided. The old fought for the right to trample the weak for their eternal chaos and cruelty. The new brought law, harsh, patriarchal, written in bloody covenants, but law nonetheless. Peace ended. Talk stopped. The Titans entrenched themselves on the bleak, barren Mount Othrys, turning it into a fortress of stone and mud. The Olympians claimed white ice-blasted Olympus. Grit ground between their teeth. The Titanomachy began, the First World War where gods learned how to slaughter immortals. Act 4. The Meat Grinder of Thessaly. The world had known fire before, but not like this. Now, the sky split in half with every bloody flash of war. Words were over. The first granite boulder tore away with living flesh from the mountains of Thrace. In an instant, the ancient forests of Thessaly turned to hot ash. War bit mercilessly into the mud of the plain, stripped of even a hint of honor or regret, only deep trenches and the thick, warm blood of the immortals. To the south loomed black, grim Othrys, the nest of the old Titans, carved from coarse granite. Cronus sat deep within its recesses, motionless, frozen like cold flint. To the north gleamed white Olympus, a blinding, sharp mica of glaciers beneath the heavy boots of young chieftains. There, Zeus waited, surrounded by the campfires of rebels, sober, cold calculation against primeval mass. Between these two peaks, 10 years of war scorched the earth. 10 years of non-stop slaughter, where the ground, barren and broken, turned into a quagmire of flesh. Rocks flew across seas, fracturing the horizon and altering riverbeds. Mortals would have burned away here in a single summer. The immortals were doomed to boil in this exact same circle of torture, 10 straight years. They fought on equal terms, for no one could die. A heavy bronze sword hacked through the mighty chest muscles of Corycian. A spear pierced Hyperion's shoulder. From the wounds flowed ichor, a sticky, hot, divine fluid. But the wounds healed instantly. The skin grew back. The absolute most they could do was stun an enemy with a boulder to the head. A Titan would fall, swallowing sand and mud between his teeth, lie there for a minute, and then rise back into the fray. A monotonous, never-ending meat grinder. The young gods did not yet wield the wrath of heaven. Zeus had no thunder. Poseidon fought without his trident. Hades without his helmet. They fought with whatever they could find, smashing the enemy with bare hands until the rawhide on their fists groaned under the strain. Every assault ended in a retreat, back into the bloody mire. Food was running out. Ambrosia remained only at the very bottom of the sacks. Divine muscles burned like heavy molten lead. Ahead lay only black sleep, a stony stupor in the roadside mud. Zeus held counsel on the mountain while the others suffocated on the front lines. In Othrys, leadership had shifted entirely to Atlas, son of Iapetus. Old Cronus had gone completely mad with fear of the prophecy. He crawled into a dark, dead-end hole, refusing the light. Atlas became the Titan's new fist. He held the lines and brutally shattered every Olympian attack. The young gods tried to break through from below and from behind. Poseidon shifted tectonic plates, making the earth beneath Othrys buckle and heave. But the granite fortress stood firm. Hades dug tunnels trying to flank the Titans from the rear, but hit a dead end in the underworld. Down there in the deep pit of Tartarus, Campe ruled, and her guard was unyielding. The trap snapped shut. The sky remained empty, the land was blocked by Atlas, and the underworld was guarded by a monster. The world was slowly dying. The earth cracked from the roaring, forests ignited from the friction of stone, rivers dried up, and seas flooded the shores. Primeval chaos was returning to swallow everything. Gaia, torn by trenches, could not endure the desecration of her body. Cronus proved to be a weak, paranoid old man who never released her firstborn from the pit, leaving them to rot under Campe's watch. The old world was simply destroying itself for the sake of power. Gaia came to Zeus at night as the trenches of Olympus burned out with exhaustion and whispered, "Want to break Atlas? Go to the very bottom. Break your oaths. Kill Campe. Unleash the monsters. Only they will give you victory." Zeus's quick plan to poison his father with the juice of a toxic herb and take the throne without major bloodshed had utterly failed. Resources were dwindling. Atlas stood unmoving. Zeus had to get his hands dirty, descend into the bottomless gloom, and forge an alliance with the savage horror of the abyss. Act 5. Anatomy of a New Order. In the 10th year of the grueling nightmare when Olympus had almost flickered out, Zeus set off into the abyss that lay deeper than death itself. At the edge of Tartarus, Campe crossed his path, a grotesque monstrosity with a scorpion's tail and 100 venomous vipers for legs. Her entire mass reeked of damp dungeons and stagnant rot. Campe didn't just guard the gates. She lunged first, trying to suffocate the rebel with the weight of her serpentine limbs. Zeus had no weapon capable of piercing her ancient calloused scales, so the slaughter devolved into a primal, suffocating brawl. The venomous sting of the scorpion crunched through his shoulder, scorching divine blood into a black scab, but the son of Cronus didn't even flinch. The rage of 10 years of defeat exploded in his veins. He caught the beast by the throat, driving his fingers deep under her slimy neckplates. Zeus slammed Campe onto her back, pinned her down with a heavy knee, and began to tear her apart with his bare hands. With a savage ripping sound, he tore out chunks of scales, along with raw, livid flesh, exposing pulsing, hot veins. Campe roared from all her beastly maws, her viper legs biting his thighs, but the god simply crushed her skeleton. Gripping the monster by the upper and lower jaws of her main maw, Zeus planted his feet against her chest, and with a dull, wet tear, ripped her in half, from throat to tail. Hot black sludge drenched the face of the future king, filling his nostrils with the stench of rotting entrails. Scales, chunks of bloody offal, and severed snake parts plummeted into the deep abyss of Tartarus. Campe was dead, the first absolute casualty of this war. This was the first true blood of the old world on the fingers of the Chronide, sticky and permanent. Zeus stood in the ash, breathing heavily through torn lips. It was then in that damp subterranean silence that he understood the core truth. Primeval horror could be overcome and physically destroyed. The magic of the old world's invulnerability was shattered once and for all by raw muscle and bone. Zeus broke open the heavy underground bolts and led the captives out of the dark. He gave them pure nectar and crammed their mouths with ambrosia. With every swallow, strength returned to the giants, and their primal spirit boiled over with furious rage. They split up. Some took their places on the ramparts. Others headed to the forge. The Cyclopes, Brontes, Steropes, and Arges proved to be no wild beasts but supreme masters of the Black Forge. They craved vengeance for centuries in the deep. Anvils groaned beneath their hammers' sparks, flying like sharp mica. They forged 3 instruments of uncompromising dominion. Zeus received the first lightning bolts, living, condensed fire and blasts of thunder capable of melting granite into water. To Poseidon, the trident, a weapon of relict alloy for tectonic plates to raise the deep sea and shatter any bedrock. To Hades, the Kyne, a helm of rawhide and archaic gloom whose bearer vanished from existence, becoming night itself. The parity that had held the war for 10 years ended in a single night. The strike was lightning fast. Hades donned the Kyne, and his very presence was instantly erased from the material world. The helm of absolute nothingness didn't just make him invisible, It literally cut the god from the fabric of space, leaving a gaping, hungry void in his place, one the universe tried and failed to fill. When Hades stepped into the granite galleries of Othrys, the fortress of the Titans shuddered with a piercing, invisible cold. The torches on the walls didn't blow out from a draft. Their thick flames silently shrank, turned blue, and died, because fire itself refused to burn beside absolute night. The air froze instantly, coating the stone in a heavy icy frost that turned the breath in one's lungs into sharp crystals. The shadows on the walls of Othrys lost their natural shapes and ceased to obey the light. They warped, elongated, and bent away from Hades like living shreds trying to tear themselves from the granite and flee. The Titan guards saw no silhouette, but their sinewy bodies broke first, their stomachs seized with spasms. This was a primal, baseless terror of absolute emptiness paralyzing the immortal will long before the first physical clash. Even Cronus, in his dead-end hole, suffocated from this sudden weight in his chest, blinded by horror, unable to lift a finger. Amidst this stony paralysis, Hades silently materialized by the throne and wrenched from his father's hands the ultimate prize, the flint sickle. The very jagged knife Cronus had once used to sever his own father's flesh, his primal mark of leadership and the bloody collateral of his power over the entire Titan tribe. At that exact moment, Poseidon slammed his trident with all his might into the root of Othrys. The mountain reeled, the granite cracked, and panic erupted among the Titans. It felt as though Gaia herself was burying them alive in her depths. The chieftains were blinded by fear. Then the 100-handed ones tumbled onto the ruins, Cottus, Gaias, and Briareus. This was no army under Zeus's command, but 100-handed madness unleashed from its chains, rotting for centuries in subterranean squalor, finally breaking free. 150 throats ruptured simultaneously in a wild, guttural roar. This storm, a mixture of century-old pain rage and beastly triumph, shook the night sky like a battering ram, deafening and drowning out even the dry, searing crash of Zeus's lightning. From this scream, the surrounding air grew heavy, and immortals vomited black blood, their entrails tearing apart from the sheer force of the roar. 300 hands worked at a frantic, uncontrollable pace. They didn't pick up rocks from the ground. They drove their claws directly into the granite body of Othrys, ripping out sheets of bedrock by the roots, tearing the skin of the earth like the dry hide of sacrificial cattle. 300 palms crushed boulders to pieces mid-air, raining a relentless storm of jagged stone down upon the enemy. The giants' joints popped out of their sockets under the weight of the blocks and crunched back into place. The bones of their fingers ground down to white dust and instantly grew back. They buried the Titans behind a solid wall of boulders, turning the enemy fortress into a bloody pulp. The young chieftains of Olympus froze, watching this relentless destruction from the rear. They suddenly realized they had made a deal with an absolutely uncontrollable, savage chaos, a living doom they could barely direct at the enemy, and one they could never stop if those 300 hands turned toward them. Zeus delivered the final stroke. Standing on the highest peak, he unleashed his entire wrath, throwing his lightning with full force. The night boiled. The water in the ocean seethed like boiling fat, and forests caught fire in a second. Nothing remained but soot and hot steam. A blinding, unbearable glare burned out the Titans' eyes and pierced their immortal skin to the very bone. The roar was as if heaven itself were crashing onto the mutilated earth. The raw elemental mass of the Titans had definitively lost to distant fire and cold calculation. The Titans broke. Their will burned away. The hundred-handed ones buried the fallen enemies under hundreds of crags, and the stone traps snapped shut, scorched, bound. The Titans awaited their sentence. Act 6. A new balance of power. The new order was forged through blood and law. Fugitives were hunted down in the charred forests. Swift packs of the hundred-handed brutally purged the land. Cronus and his faction were bound in rusted bronze fetters. Zeus cast them into the very bottom of Tartarus, a deep pit outside the world. Poseidon himself forged a bronze wall and heavy gates around the prison, and a triple wall of night tightly enveloped this subterranean dungeon where light never reached. The hundred-handed stood like pillars at the threshold, a vigilant, implacable guard. There could be no rematch. The judgment of the new king was a freezing process, an act of creation building a new world from the bones of the defeated. Atlas, whose beastly strength had caused the most trouble, received no quick death or darkness of Tartarus. He was taken to the far west, where the world shears off into the abyss and chained to the very axis of existence. The spine of Atlas was doomed to crack under the unbearable weight of the starry vault. The most dangerous enemy became an eternal workhorse, holding the sky over his tormentor's head with his own agony. The traitors of the old world, Oceanus, Prometheus, Themis, Helios, and Mnemosyne, survived thanks to their calculation. They caught the stench of Cronus's defeat just in time. Their cowardly neutrality or direct betrayal of their own clan was handsomely rewarded. Zeus allowed them to keep their lands, domains, and status. The overthrown Father Time Cronus received mercy only centuries later, when the memory of the war had turned to ash. He was released from the pit, but it was the ultimate humiliation. Zeus gave him governance over the islands of the blessed. Now the old wolf herds the shades of the righteous in a golden cage, ruling a scrap of the afterlife by the strict blood-written laws of Olympus. Cronus's power was gone forever. When the smoke from the final strike at last cleared, Thessaly stood as a mute, scorched wasteland, a gargantuan cemetery of the former universe. The plains where the blood of immortals had flowed non-stop for 10 years lost their very shape. Clay, mud, and flesh ground to dust melted under the strikes of heavenly fire, hardening into a solid, jagged blanket of black glass. In these glossy, dead mirrors, nothing living grew anymore. They reflected only an empty, mutilated sky. The seas around Thessaly lay motionless and heavy, choked to the very shores with thick gray ash from the incinerated ancient forests of Thrace. The waves no longer crashed. With a dull rattle, they rolled a sticky, dirty mire of soot and fat from dead sea monsters. The mountains, torn apart by the hundred-handed for ammunition, stood as gnawed granite stumps from which a slate-gray, toxic smoke still drifted. Right here, amidst this numb, slag-charred rocks and the stench of a cosmic conflagration, the young gods began to lay the foundations of their rule. Their grand new order was built not on clean, blossoming earth, but quite literally on the bones, glory, and ash of a world they had indeed freed from the tyranny of Cronus, but destroyed down to its very foundation. To keep from drawing one another's blood immediately after their triumph, the three brothers cast lots. But this division was a mere formality, a cynical act by which Zeus permanently fixed the limits of their power. No blind chance here. Each simply received what he had been filling up with back in the sour blindness of their father's stomach, except now these elements became their lifelong cages. Zeus, as befitted the victor, claimed the sky, the right of first among equals, the flash of lightning and the supreme court. Poseidon, who had fantasized about Cronus's sole throne and craved to bend the entire universe beneath his trident, was forced to return for good to the damp, endless expanse of water. his face darkened with hidden rage, his fingers gripping the metal so hard, his nails left dents. They locked him away in storms, leaving him forever second, wedged between the empty sky of Zeus and the mute underworld floor. Hades received the underworld, the realm of the dead, of rotten ash and eternal darkness. While Zeus basked in the rays of glory on Olympus, Hades was buried alive in a subterranean grave, condemned to rule over shades and listen to the groans of the Titans chained in Tartarus. His silence at the council was colder than the ice of Olympus. He submitted to the new law, but harbored a deep, silent resentment for ages to come. The earth and Olympus remained shared territory, where each of the three from then on kept a hand on the hilt of his sword, waiting for a knife in the back. Primal strength and unbridled chaos finally retreated before the onslaught of technology, calculation, and pure intellect. Zeus secured this fragile parity with 3 strategic marriages, turning even the divine bed into an instrument of control. Metis gave his decisions a ruthless wisdom. Themis bore the Horae and the Moirai for the world, permanently locking the threads of human and divine destinies into the vice of strict order. And Mnemosyne brought the Muses, not for entertainment, but so their songs would eternally etch the greatness of the new gods in time, burning even the memory of the Titans out of future generations. This universe no longer rested on the animal fear of a hungry predator. From now on, above the scorched ash of civilization, rose a cold monolith of reason, law, and memory. Structure triumphed over chaos, turning ancient horror into a hunted, chained beast beneath the feet of its new masters. Act 1. Blood of the Betrayed Sky. The battle ended. The heavy gates of Tartarus slammed shut. Zeus's decree cut them off from the world. The old Titans sank into the abyss, and a new king took the summit. He thought, forever. The 100-handed ones sat by the gates, hounds on chains, to guard the new yoke. But Gaia went mute with rage. Emptiness. The new king became a butcher, just like his father. He exchanged one set of captives for another. The earth shattered again. Convulsions. Primeval children rotted in the deep darkness of her bowels. Vengeance crawled out from the oldest forgotten wounds of the world. Once Cronus severed the flesh of Uranus. The scorching blood of the sky poured onto the dust. Gaia absorbed that thick, salty ichor, burying it deep within her burning belly. Now the time had come. The earth caused the blood to quicken. The Phlegraean Fields cracked open. The stench of sulfur rose. From the fissures crawled a new tribe. Giants, not men, not gods, taller than cliffs, savage faces, beards bristling like dry fire. And below the waist, the flesh of beasts. Instead of legs, hundreds of massive scaly vipers writhed. They pulsated, hissed, spat venom into the grass, tore at the granite veins of the earth. The monsters heard every rustle from miles away, a ready army of chaos, a single goal to rip out the heart of Olympus. Gaia knew the word of the fates, the secrets whispered by 3 pale hags in the dark. The gods are powerless against this brood. No immortal can kill a giant alone. A mortal is needed, one whose body reeks of sweat and knows the taste of decay, whose hand wields a mortal weapon. To burn away this brand of mortality, the earth grew a magical herb for her sons. She grew it in the total blindness of her recesses, but Zeus saw through the night. He moved first. With a single command, he extinguished all the light of the world. He forbade Eos to bring out the dawn, Selene to shine her pale eye, and Helios to drive his horses. A dead, mute darkness fell. The universe held its breath. The Thunderer descended to the land, groping with his bare hands. He destroyed the magic herb down to the last stalk. Only the juice remained on his fingers. The giants were left unprotected, but rage boiled in their chests. Pallas Athena went into the world of men. She brought the only mortal to white Olympus, Heracles. His bow had to smell of death. Act 2. The Fall of Uranus's Children. Alcyoneus let out the first cry, the oldest, the heaviest. On the grounds of his birth in Phlegra, he held a secret. His serpentine body knew no death. Any wound, even a torn open heart, healed in an instant the moment his viperous coils touched his native granite. "Choke the sky!" roared the giant. The stones of the divine palaces cracked. The giants moved toward the heavens, like shattered cliffs thrusting upward when the earth splits. Serpentine legs shredded the rocks, leaving bloody furrows in the clay. They uprooted ancient oaks, igniting them with underground heat, and hurled them into the sky like flaming spears. They broke the spines of mountains. They uprooted Ossa, piling it onto Pelion, a living, hissing ascent to the very gates of Olympus. The world choked on untamed horror. The gods met them at the edge of the firmament. The gleaming gold of armor clashed with foul beasts of coarse scales, stench, and fangs. Zeus struck first. A lightning bolt, jagged and vast enough to split a mountain, tore open Alcyoneus's chest. His insides were burned to black coal, but the giant only bellowed, low and ominous. His hissing tails dug into the rock of Phlegra. The monster sucked in the earth's juices. In an instant, the scorched skin tightened. Divine weapons could not harm him. Then Heracles stepped forward. The bowstring sang. An arrow dipped in Hydra's venom struck the giant's shoulder. Blood boiled in his veins. Alcyoneus screamed as they scream in hell itself. Yet his native stone pumped strength into his wounded flesh. The earth would not let him die as long as he stood upon her. The hero did not wait. The bow flew into the dust. Slick with sweat, Heracles slipped under the blows of stone fists. He dove under the giant's arm and slammed his entire weight into the monster's lower coils and pried them up. The creature's roots hung suspended in midair. A heavy crash. The giant slammed into the dirt. Heracles locked onto the scaly base with a death grip. Through a hail of stones, he dragged the monster away from Phlegra. The boundary crossed. The bond with Gaia snapped. Alcyoneus's body went limp. Heracles leaped onto the massive chest and smashed his olive club down. The skull shattered in a spray. While the first giant lay dying in the dust, Porphyrion was already storming Olympus. The earth poured lust and madness into his head. Dirty talons were already tearing Hera's golden robes. In a fury, Zeus hurled a thunderbolt. The son of Gaia froze, scorched by lightning. Flesh turned to ash. The Thunderer lowered his hands. He believed victory was his. The king of Olympus was wrong. The earth had poured too much madness into Porphyrion. Overcoming the paralysis, the giant lunged forward. Dirty talons tore through the golden silks on Hera's breast with a hiss, clutching her throat until the goddess choked. Zeus was too late with the next strike. Thick smoke from the thunderbolt blinded the king's eyes. Heracles had to deliver the final blow. He ran in the wake of the thunder, pressing forward through the veil of soot. A black arrow pierced Porphyrion's throat a hair's breadth from Hera's fingers. Venom instantly burned through his brain. The carcass plummeted into the abyss with a crash. Through the soot, Ephialtes surged forward. He spat acid into the faces of the Olympians. The monster nearly crushed Apollo, pinning his golden shield to the granite. The god of light, dripping with sticky sweat, drew his last arrow, rammed it into the giant's left eye. Light burned out the pupil. The son of Gaia roared and threw his head back, jaws agape for another blast of venom. At that exact instant, a second bowstring twanged. Heracles' arrow entered the right eye up to the fletching. The black venom of the hydra stopped the beast's heart. In death throes, the giant fell flat on his back, his mighty tails blindly lashing his own kind until Ares' chariot ground the torso into a wet pulp. The god of war himself fought like a frenzied butcher. His chariot cut a wide swath through the living coils. Ares, charging past, drove his spear into the throat of the nearest beast. The spawn fell. The god roared in triumph. He raised his bloody fists to the sky, but he forgot about the lower coils. The spasms of the wounded serpent became a convulsion of the elements. A scaly tail whipped upward, a direct hit to the chariot. Wood splintered. The horses went wild. The god of war was thrown into the bloody pulp beneath the feet of other monsters. Immobile in the mud, pinned by the weight of his own armor, the Olympian screamed in rage. Heracles ran up from behind. One heavy club strike broke the giant's spine. Another moment, and the monster's fangs would have sunk into the flesh of the fallen deity. The black venom from the fangs was meant to burn away divine flesh. The olive club was faster. At the marine borders, the water boiled. Enceladus clashed with Athena. The goddess raised her shield bearing the gaze of Medusa. Wild horror struck the giant's chest. The beast crawled backward, leaving miles of bloody foam in its wake. Athena hovered over the waves. She ripped a chunk of land, guts and all, from the body of Italy, hurled the granite monolith after him. The impact crushed the sea. Enceladus was buried alive under billions of tons of rock. This island men would later call Sicily. The monster palace tried to attack Athena from the flank. Zeus's daughter slashed his serpentine knees with a jagged sword. The giant fell. Frenzied by the scent of slaughter, the goddess stepped on his throat and flayed the scaly skin off him alive. She draped it over her shoulders as a trophy, but flayed, dripping with hot flesh, Pallas still hissed. The mad monster tried to sting the goddess. His life force was inexhaustible to the immortals. Heracles stepped close. Bare fingers dug into the flesh. A mortal's hand ripped the heart from the torn chest. A final spasm. Silence. Nearby, the sea boiled. Polyboats chased Poseidon through the tsunamis. The Lord of the Seas bared his teeth. He turned his horses near the island of Kos. With a roar, he drove his trident into the stone mass. A severed chunk as high as the sky crashed down on the serpent's head. This boulder became the island of Nisyros. It crushes Polybotes to the bottom to this day. On land lame, Hephaestus scorched enemies with white-hot molten metal. When one of the giants swung a boulder at him, the blacksmith god overturned a vat of molten iron. Liquid death flowed beneath the bronze armor, welded skin to flesh, and burned out the insides. The viperous legs charred. The monstrosity turned into a frozen statue of metal and scorched flesh. Invisible death walked through the chaos. Hermes, in the helm of Hades, became a shadow. He swept between enemies, methodically hacking off the heads of their serpent legs. The giants fell on their bellies, losing their footing. They crawled in the mud, bleeding black blood and roaring. The god could not kill them. In the wake of the invisible, Hermes walked the completely visible Heracles. His heavy club mercilessly crushed every defenseless nape the thief god left on the ground. At the peak of the slaughter, 3 pale figures stepped onto the field. The Fates. In their hands hung heavy bronze clubs. They walked like mowers through dry grass. Agrius and Thun hid behind shields in vain. The bronze of the goddesses of fate crushed their armor like brittle glass. Short, dull thuds, broken spines. Pride ground to dust. The giants lay on the granite turned into a mash of bone and scale. But their betrayed blood refused to die, pulsing in torn veins. Heracles approached last. He drew his bow and sent a venomous arrow into each shattered head. Against fate, there is no armor, and against a mortal, there is no immortality. Act 3. Peace upon the bones. The sun crossed the edge of the sky. It was over. The spawn of betrayed Uranus was shattered. Those who managed to crawl away sought salvation in the cracks. They yearned to merge with the burning depths, trying to hide within Gaia's womb. Yet Heracles' arrows found them even in the dark. His mighty hand knew no mercy. Every shot was a final stroke, fulfilling the prophecy down to the last drop of venomous rot. The Phlegraean Fields became a mass grave. Severed serpent tails still twitched convulsively beneath billions of tons of new mountains. The stench of ozone, burnt flesh, and dry sulfur hung over the sea for years. Zeus stood atop the mangled summit of Olympus. In his scorched fingers, a final lightning bolt crackled. Primeval chaos was trampled deep underground, sealed with basalt. The new cold order of the Olympians stood fast, hard as flint. Mankind gained the right to live under the watch of the gods. That night, they proved, for the sake of their power, they would rip the earth out by its roots. The cosmos fell silent again, plunged into a dead, cold stillness. Act 1. The chaos born and the ruin of divine order. Olympus choked on sacrificial fat. The deities celebrated the slaughter of the serpent-legged giants. The Phlegraean Fields became a massive abattoir. The corpses of Gaia's colossal sons lay torn, butchered by the arrows of mortal Heracles. Black gore oozed into the arid fissures. The womb of the earth shuddered with silent weeping. Her primordial children were not merely defeated. They were slaughtered like cattle, slain by a creature reeking of sweat and decay. The Great Mother felt only raw emptiness and fury. She descended into the deepest abysses of the cosmos, down where ancient darkness grew cold. There, amidst soot, pitch, and the fumes of her butchered children's fresh blood, the wronged ground coupled with grim Tartarus. It was a mating of pure despair and vengeance. The fruit of this spasm was the final, most monstrous abomination of flesh, Typhon, a living weapon, spawned with a single purpose, to tear out the heart of Olympus and snap the spine of the heavens. He grew faster than night shadows. He surpassed every measure of the living. From the waist up, a colossal human torso loomed, crowned by a savage skull. It rose so high that his matted, greasy locks scraped the cold stars. His mangled, weathered face vanished into the midnight gloom. When he stretched out his arms, his left hand plunged into the silt of the furthest east. His right hand crushed the granite of the distant west. Instead of fingers, 100 reptilian maws swarmed on his wrists, biting their own scales. They ceaselessly spewed black, tarry flame and venom that hissed against the stone. Below the hips, his human form vanished. There, hundreds of heavy vipers pulsed and coiled into massive living knots, rearing with a dull hiss up to his shoulders. Coarse, bristling feathers coated this colossus of muscle. From the slits of his eyes, on his mane, hideous face, and every serpentine throat, glared a crimson, searing light. The throats of this multi-headed entity shrieked in 100 different keys. The main maw roared like a maddened bull or a hoarse lion before the slaughter. His serpent hands bayed like a pack of starved hounds. His viper legs emitted a sharp, whistling hiss that shattered bedrock. When the behemoth drew himself to his full height, the flint crust of the world cracked beneath his heavy tread. He marched on Olympus. He ripped coastal cliffs from the soil, hurling incandescent boulders into the firmament. Scalding torrents and filthy sea foam erupted from his 100 maws. A primal terror seized the immortals. The radiant rulers of the cosmos trembled and fled. They abandoned marble palaces to the fury of subterranean fires. They fled south, where the scorching, dust-choked sands of Egypt offered some asylum from the beast's all-seeing eye. There, amidst the frantic crush, the world's masters renounced their majesty. They feverishly mutilated their own immortal forms to become livestock and wild beasts. Apollo cast away his shining crown, plunging into suffocating clouds as a gray, predatory hawk. Cunning Hermes masked his treacherous mind beneath the curved beak and filthy plumage of a Nile ibis. Raging Ares, who had just laughed amidst the bloody carnage of the giants, dove into the bottom silt in panic, transforming into a mute, slimy fish with frozen eyes. Dionysus tangled himself in briars, reduced to a mangy, reeking goat. Artemis the huntress skulked in the thickets, a lithe feline flinching at every stir of the air. Even the queen of the gods, proud Hera, huddled in the nearest shed as a snow-white cow. Her hooves rattled against the manure. From her jaws dripped the thick froth of animal dread. Humanity cowered in burrows like worms, holding their breath in subterranean darkness. They waited for the 100-armed freak to obliterate their settlements and erase all memory of mankind. Only the Sky Father stood firm on the precipice of a shattered cliff. A ruler's pride, heavier than the ridges, and fierce shame before an empty, ancient throne bound his fingers to the scorched hilt of his thunderbolt. Beside him, through the stench and smoke, stood Pallas Athena. Her eyes blazed with merciless contempt. She would not run. The daughter lashed her father with savage words, branding the other gods as cowards, demanding only one thing: iron, flesh, and blood. Act 2. The King's Fall and the Secret Healing. The Thunderer stepped into the void. Lightning crackled in his iron right hand. Slung in his belt was the adamantine sickle, the same jagged blade Cronus once used to castrate his father, Uranus. Zeus strode across the clouds, unleashing blinding pillars of fire. The ground beneath the giant melted like wax. The sky bled with a living, crimson glow. Ocean waters boiled to the seabed. They collided at Mount Cassios, where Syria jams into the Egyptian marshes. The Thunder Lord struck with a sweeping arc, driving the adamantine sickle deep into the 100-armed mass with a sickening crunch. The Colossus roared. Black, toxic fluid flooded the slopes. The monster recoiled. The Thunderer, blinded by early triumph, surged forward for the death blow. It was his undoing. The Titan was swifter. Hundreds of viper coils clamped around the god's torso with a dull whistle, crushing ribs into splinters. A violent wrench, and the jagged sickle flew from numb fingers. The monster pinned the king beneath him. Merciless talons tore into the joints. The monster ripped the white tendons from the Thunderer's limbs alive. The Lord of the Cosmos went limp, reduced to a boneless sack of pale flesh. He slung the helpless form over his gore-drenched shoulders. He crossed the sea, casting the fallen king into the depths of the Corycian cave. The supreme Sky Lord lay in putrid mire. His sinewless flesh slowly leaked burning ichor onto cold basalt slabs. Above him loomed the dragoness Delphone, half woman, half serpent, whose scaled tail never slept. The realm ossified without law. Typhon ruled the ash wastes. Under his venomous breath, all fresh water in mortal realms soured into bitter gall. Smothering soot choked out the sun for long months. Birds plummeted mid-flight, strangled by the sulphurous stench erupting from 100 dragon maws. The ground parched and fractured, hurtling back toward primordial chaos. Olympus stood desolate, choked with ash and dust. Then Hermes, the cat-footed thief alongside the shaggy forest dweller Aegypon, risked a desperate heist. They slipped into the Cilician underworld like shadows. Aegypon pressed a reed flute to his lips. From its pipes poured a mournful, sweet melody capable of lulling death itself. Encountering the spell, the dragoness lowered her heavy eyelids bound by the sound. The trickster moved without a wasted motion. He drew the bearskin from beneath her scaled underbelly without shifting a single stone. Stepping over the monster's numbed coils, the thief glided deeper into the stifling depths of the grotto. He walked blind, guided only by the heavy reek of spilled divine blood and the faint white luminescence of burning ichor. The father of the pantheon lay at the very bottom of the cavern, pressed into cold muck. He was a motionless, mangled hunk of meat, able only to wheeze through broken teeth and stare into the subterranean blackness with swollen eyes. Hermes knelt in the slime beside the fallen king and unfurled the heavy bearskin. Armed with ancient lore of the secret knots of immortal flesh, Hermes worked methodically. Thread by thread, he threaded the raw, bloody sinews back through the gods' torn meat, stitching the severed joints together against the thunderer's muffled groans. With a wet crunch, the god's muscles swelled once more with their former iron. In his chest boiled a fury the cosmos had never witnessed. Act 3. The Return of Thunder and the Eternal Tomb. The Olympian did not waste a second. He vaulted onto a chariot drawn by 4 fire-breathing monsters and tore into the heavens. Heavy lightning bolts, freshly forged by cyclopes in subterranean furnaces, blazed in his fists. The Titan saw his healed nemesis. His serpentine lower limbs plowed the granite once more. Zeus pursued the beast across lands and seas, searing his back into a black scab. At Mount Nysa, a third force entered the fray. The 3 grim fates. The goddesses of destiny stepped forth to meet the behemoth, masking their pale countenances behind the guises of gentle nymphs. They offered the giant succulent ephemeral fruits, whispering sweetly that this nourishment would grant him the power to overthrow heaven. The monster believed them. With a wet gulp, he swallowed the toxic fruit. Instantly, the primordial poison of destiny boiled in his guts. The dragon heads on his hands convulsed, tearing at each other. The giant's muscles withered. His serpentine tails trailed helplessly through the mud. Broken, the creature crawled north toward Thrace to the bleak slopes of Mount Haemus. Here the slaughter reached its zenith. Summoning his final spasming strength, the Titan uprooted entire mountain ranges and hurled them at the sky. But the Sky Lord countered. His lightning shattered the granite blocks mid-air, raining a hail of razor-sharp shards back upon the primordial abomination. Massive stone crags smashed the beast's ribs, crushing his reptilian crests. Thick black blood erupted in a torrent so immense it flooded the mountain slopes, painting the peak in the hue of rot and slaughter. Blinded by pain, drenched in scalding ichor, Typhon fled across the Sicilian Sea. Zeus overtook him right at the shoreline. Exerting all his might, the thunderer ripped the colossal Mount Etna from the womb of the earth. The void swallowed the horrific groaning snap of terrestrial bone as the god hoisted the island's massive basalt foundation and brought it crashing down onto the head of Gaia's serpent-legged son. The Titan did not perish. The lineage of Tartarus knows no mortality. As the mountain sealed him beneath its mass, a final breath from 100 dragon heads escaped from under its colossal base, freezing the ocean still. The monster survived, crushed under the weight of the island. To this day, when he shifts beneath Sicily's stone plates, the earth quakes. Torrents of molten sulfur and fire erupt from the searing maw of Etna. It is the imprisoned rage of the beast, breathing. The war ended. The Olympians' cold order settled over the world like a tombstone. The divine returned to Olympus, yet in their golden eyes a reflection of terror remained, the dread of an apocalypse that almost tore reality apart. The world fell silent. The smoke of human sacrifice no longer billowed into clouds. It crawled across the dirt as a heavy black shroud. Deep beneath that soil, the mangled heart of chaos still pulses. Order is established. But that which was torn apart and buried alive will not forget the taste of vengeance. It simply waits in the dark.